everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, and my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Good evening, gentlemen.
What's going on?
Oh, not much. I'm excited to talk about our topic tonight.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Good evening. We went Transylvanian again, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't ask me. I just make up the most random, just whatever.
The children of the night. They make such beautiful music.
Oh, we're starting off this way, are we? All right.
Well, we already started off on the fucking pre-broadcast with, it's what it is.
It is what it is. Well, tonight, you guys, our topic is General Tom Thumb. And what do you guys know about Tom Thumb?
I know that he was part of P.T. Barnum's crew of sideshow attractions. And
Yes, he was.
I do know that much. Beyond that, I don't know a whole lot. Like,
how about you, Blake?
I don't either. I mean, I watched The Greatest Showman when it came out. I know that was all about, that whole, but other than that, I have read.
Also highly inaccurate.
I know. It's totally highly inaccurate.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very.
Yes.
But anyways, no, it's, I've read about P.T. Barnum, mainly when it ties into like Queen Victoria, because that's kind of like where my, interest lies and stuff like that. So I find that portion fascinating. But actually delving into himself, nah, I haven't really done anything with his story. So I'm really interested.
Well, I think you guys are really going to like the story tonight. Just to kind of give you an idea of what life was like for entertainers around the Civil War era, in time. And I'm going to tell you, everybody, right off the bat, I don't sanitize history. There may be some words in here that some people might find offensive. You cannot tell the story of P.T. Barnum or Tom Thumb without using the word freak show. I want you to know right off the bat, that is what these were called. They are referenced that way. They did call little people dwarves. And whenever you hear those words, those are how they are being referred to in the story and in reference in history to them. So I am going to use those words, but please know that I'm not going to sanitize history. This is the story, and I'm going to do my best to tell it as accurately as I can.
Right.
So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about Tom Thumb. So in the fairy tale, Tom Thumb, as told by the Brothers Grimm, there was a poor countryman and his wife who yearned for a child, even if it was no bigger than his father's thumb. And the Queen of the Fairies had heard their cries, and knowing that they were kind people, they gave them a tiny baby. Literally, a tiny baby. And they named the boy Tom Thumb, and he was loved and cherished. And he was smart and daring and a bit mischievous. And Tom's father had to go to the woods one day to cut wood, and Tom begged him to let him bring the horse and cart. Now the father wanted to know how Tom would manage such a great task. But Tom, ever smart and resourceful, told his father that he would just whisper it in the horse's ear and tell it where to go. And Tom did just that, and he delivered the cart successfully. Now a pair of strangers passing by saw the horse and cart without a driver, and they were stunned. They followed the cart, and they saw Tom's father pluck the little boy from the horse's ear. The two strangers were awestruck, and they hatched a plan to buy the little man and show him off in town and make a fortune. They approached Tom's father and offered to buy the boy. But Tom's father said, "No, not for all the money in the world would I sell him." But Tom, ever thinking, whispered in his father's ear, "Let me go. I will soon come back again." So the father sold the child for a large piece of money, and Tom Thumb's adventures began. He traveled the world and saw wondrous places. He was swallowed up by a cow, snatched up by an eagle, battled a giant, rode a mouse, eaten by fish, gifted magical tokens from the fairies, entertained King Arthur, and was knighted. And then he went back home to his parents. Now, the earliest surviving text of this story is a 40-page booklet printed in London in 1621 entitled "The History of Tom Thumb the Little, for his small stature surnamed King Arthur's Dwarf."
So you just got a horse going by with no driver, and everybody's like, "Look at that."
Right, exactly. So that is a very cut down version of the actual Grimm's fairy tale.
Does Thumbelina factor in at any point?
I ain't
or
talking
like
about Thumbelina tonight.
I know, I'm just curious. I'm saying about like
Hold the story.
Okay, I didn't know if they were the same, if they occupied the same universe. You know what I mean?
I don't. That's only in modern retellings where Tom
Okay.
meets Thumbelina and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But so that is the very shortened version, and there are many versions of that Grimm's fairy tale.
Right.
And when people think of Tom Thumb, most people recall the character in the story. However, there was a real life man, a performer, who was known all over the world, who took his name from the English folklore character. And this is the extraordinary story of the real Tom Thumb. In 1838, Louis Daguerre created the first photograph of a human being. Samuel Morse demonstrated the telegraph, and railroads were booming across the United States. Mass production of newspapers had just become possible, and the first steamship, purposely built to cross the Atlantic Ocean, had just sailed. Martin Van Buren was the 8th president of the U.S. and was running the country. But Sherwood Stratton and his wife Cynthia were focused on a different life-changing event, the birth of their third child. The soon arriving new mouth to feed would seriously strain their already meager finances. Sherwood was a carpenter, and Cynthia was a maid in one of the hotels in the village of Bridgeport, Connecticut. They already had 2 daughters. Frances was 4 and Elizabeth was 2. And on January 4th of 1838, the new baby arrived, and they named the little boy Charles Sherwood Stratton. He was happy and healthy and big. He weighed 9 pounds 8 ounces at his birth.
Good God.
Dang.
And any woman who's ever had a child knows that's a big baby.
Yeah.
And
I was 8 pounds.
I was too.
I was like 8 pounds 15 ounces.
I was 6 pounds 9 ounces. So, so 9 pounds 8 ounces was a big baby. And at 6 months old, little Charles weighed 15 pounds and he was 25 inches tall.
Dang.
And then he just stopped growing. His parents became convinced they became concerned when they noticed that after his first birthday, he hadn't grown at all. So they took him to the doctor, who gave them the news that little Charles most likely would never grow to reach a normal height. Charles was what was known as a proportional dwarf, meaning his arms and legs were proportionate to his body size. But otherwise, his body was healthy, and size aside, he was a perfectly normal child. And as the years passed, Cynthia grew so protective of her small son that when they had to travel, she would put him in a basket covered with a blanket to shield him from the stares and taunts of the local townsfolk. You see, during this period in history, there was little understanding of people with developmental problems or physical variations. And those who appeared or acted different were often ostracized and labeled as freaks.
Those are my people.
Yeah, exactly.
Me too.
And good on her for taking care of him, because a lot of times people would just send people away if they didn't fit the norm and fit the what people were looking for.
And his parents couldn't help but worry. After all, how would their little boy be able to thrive in a world that was clearly too big for him? Now, in the winter of 1842, 4 years later, a traveler was on his way to New York when the Hudson River froze over. And unable to continue, he was forced to take residence in a small hotel in Bridgeport. The rent was acceptable because his brother owned the place. The stranded traveler's name was Phineas Taylor Barnum.
Good old PT.
At this time, Barnum was not yet the world's greatest showman. He sold hair tonic for men. But,
and he could use some himself.
Damn, Ryan.
But Barnum also exhibited strange things in glass cases and was becoming known for his freak shows. He had just purchased the Scudder American Museum and renamed it Barnum's American Museum. It was a museum of curiosities, and he needed more attractions. Barnum had seen that the public craved freaks of nature, and he was always happy to give nature a little help. His hoaxes had included a cat that he dyed purple, a woman he purported to be 161 years old, and his latest boon was the Fiji mermaid.
Hey, I got one of those.
You
the
sure
Fiji
did.
mermaid. Oh, can you get it, Ryan?
Yeah, it's right here. That's what it looks
right.
like.
That's right. And the Fiji mermaid
Nice.
had netted Barnum a hefty fortune, and it was making his name known. Now he needed something equally spectacular to follow up with.
Mm-hmm.
So, stranded in his Bridgeport Hotel that freezing winter of 1842, Barnum unexpectedly had a little time to do some talent scouting, and he had heard whispers of an extraordinary little local boy, and he knew that he had to meet the child. Now, it's unclear if the boy was brought to Barnum or Barnum went to the child, but the meeting happened. The parents, as Barnum looked them over, he noticed that they were normal size. And the parents told Barnum that the doctors really couldn't explain why their son was so small. And they further explained that he might grow, but he hadn't grown an inch since he was 6 months old. P.T. Barnum's eyes lit up with excitement. If the clever and adorable child didn't grow, he would be just the kind of freak that people would line up around the block to see. And Barnum could smell that money. He offered the parents $3 a week to take the child and exhibit him in New York. And at first, Cynthia was unsure, but the money would help, and it was more than her husband made. So a contract was struck for a 4-week trial period, and the $12 was paid on the spot. That $12 in 1842 money would be the equivalent of $459.77.
For a month, essentially.
That was his month pay.
$460. This is the only thing that I don't like about Barnum. Barnum is he has this at first, like when I hate saying the word acquires, but
a proclivity to underpay.
No, actually, he had a proclivity to overpay.
He just feels slimy a little bit whenever he's going to like bring these people into his fold, so to speak. And it just feels weird.
That's what he is, though. He's a promoter.
I know.
That's what he's doing. I mean, he's essentially
a purveyor of curiosities,
right? And he's selling hair tonic. He just bought everything. He's got all these displays and stuff. It's a medicine.
Bills.
It's a medicine show, and he wants to attract people to buy his hair tonic. So yeah, he's a little.
Oh,
I
totally get it. It's just he's always, his character itself has always just felt a little slimy to me, just a little bit.
Right.
Right.
So the contract struck. The 4-week trial period is set to begin, and at the end of November of 1842, when the river unfroze, Barnum and 4-year-old Charles Stratton, the kid is 4, went to New York. And New York back then wasn't the glorious and glamorous destination that we think of today. It was a rough boomtown, overrun with crime and 250,000 New Yorkers that were hungry for entertainment. And they found it at Barnum's American Museum.
And that is right next, very close to the 5 Points. When you see Gangs of New York, when you go and see that movie, that is exactly like the American Museum was like a few blocks from that, all that going on. So it is very, very rough.
Right. And for 25 cents, the public was enthralled by exotic animals, a human automatron, a working model of Niagara Falls, and an aquarium. But the most intriguing part of the museum was the Hall of Living Curiosities. Here, the public could see up close the most unique humans in the world. It was Barnum's freak show. And now there were 2 types of freaks. The exotic freaks, described as wild people, cannibals, savages, and missing links who fell somewhere in between human and animal. And then there were the respectable freaks, humans with unusual bodies, but they were decked in finery, well-spoken with good manners. The bearded lady who sang beautiful songs, Chang and Ang, the conjoined twins, and the 4-legged girl all fell into the respectable category. It was the world's first mass appeal, fully commercialized freak show, and it was packaged as respectable family fun. And it was 4-year-old Charles Stratton's new home.
So is there like a check mark that he has to go through that's like, how do you get category? I guess because I know he had like, the dog boy.
Mm-hmm.
was
Right.
one that he had. So I guess that
Right.
would classify. I guess he would have classified him into the.
He would have been
Right.
the dog faced boy would have actually fallen into the respectable category because he did dress the dog faced boy in fine clothing, but he would also throw a ball on stage and have him go and fetch it. So it fell somewhere in the middle. I mean, Barnum put on a show. I mean, I'm not
Mhm.
saying it's the right thing to do, but that was the kind of entertainment. But the dog boy would also speak and tell poems, but then he would go and fetch a ball on the stage.
That's
So-
Ryan's new trick at our investigations. We're just gonna have him bark and go fetch a ball, and then you got to tell a poem before we get started.
I'm a human being, damn it, just like you.
So Barnum provided the child and his mother with living quarters on the 5th floor of the museum, right across from the hall from a room occupied by 2 giants. And Barnum set straight to work, tutoring his newest act. He knew he had to do more than simply put his newest oddity on display. Now, you see, Barnum taught all of his acts to perform. The armless man cut out paper valentines with scissors using his feet, and the bearded lady performed musical interludes. And Charles was no different. Barnum taught him to sing and dance and mime and do impersonations of famous people. And young Charles was a natural. And P.T. Barnum was determined to make Charles Stratton a star, no matter what. Now he just needed a name. Now, Charles Stratton was a perfectly fine name, but it was missing that sizzle, that star quality. Charles needed a marketable name. And Barnum thought on the puzzle and determined that Charles should be known as Tom Thumb, but not just Tom Thumb, General Tom Thumb, named after the character in English folklore. But the name wasn't enough. The wheels were spinning inside the greatest showman's head. And to increase entertainment value, he decided he would market the preschooler as a young man. And Barnum created a whole new identity for the child. Charles, now General Tom Thumb, was an 11-year-old English gentleman. Someone from England would have been considered exotic to people in New York. And Barnum taught Charles proper manners, conversational eloquence, and table etiquette befitting a young English gentleman. Now, Cynthia Stratton was not consulted about the name change, and she was furious until the money started rolling in.
Oh.
Now, on December 9th of 1842, Charles Stratton made his grand appearance in the lecture room at Barnum's American Museum. He sang Yankee Doodle in his high-pitched voice. Now, initially, Charles sat in a small diorama each morning and afternoon alongside the 2-headed snake in a bottle. And museum ticket holders could stroll by and just stare at him. Sometimes, I know.
So
Can you
awkward.
imagine
That's
this
so
little 4-year-old?
awkward to me.
Right.
It's just that's the part that I'm just like, oh, it's slimy. It's
This
just
4-year-old
weird.
sitting in his own little diorama,
Yeah.
letting people look at him.
Right.
Now, sometimes he appeared in costume, wearing a body stocking and impersonating a statue. Sometimes he was dressed as Cupid or different Grecian heroes. And he sometimes was dressed as Napoleon, complete with the mannerisms and hand and vest. Now, museum goers would often stop and ask Charles questions. And the plucky 4-year-old, he was intelligent and quick-witted, so he would answer back. And he was charming enough to defeat even the most hardened heckler. And Barnum quickly realized that the kid's talent was wasted in the freak show. Charles was a natural-born performer, and he was good at everything. Dollar signs lit up in Barnum's eyes once again. The museum had an auditorium with 3,000 seats, and Barnum was sure he could fill them all if he put General Tom Thumb on the stage. So he took out an ad in the paper that read, Mr. P.T. Barnum is proud to announce that he has imported from London, to add to his collection of the most extraordinary curiosities from all over the world, the rarest, the tiniest, the most diminutive dwarf imaginable, General Tom Thumb. The Barnum spin had begun, and the press took the bait. In mid-December of 1842, Charles made his debut to the theater packed It was packed. The house was packed. And when his tiny 3-inch feet pattered onto the stage, Barnum's newest star commanded the house. He did impersonations and skits and proved to have impeccable comic timing. And he brought the house down with his finale when he danced and played a miniature hornpipe. And as he took his bow, the theater was deafening with cheers and thunderous applause. And the press review of his show praised Charles by saying, General Tom Thumb Jr., the dwarf exhibiting at the American Museum, is by far the most wonderful specimen of a man that ever astonished the world. The young gentleman, 11 years old, weighing less than an infant of 6 months, is truly a wonder. He is lively, talkative, well-proportioned, and withal quite a comical chap. So the paper loved him.
Hey man, he's like a king of vaudeville at this point. This dude is
Exactly.
He's tearing the house down.
I mean, it's cool. It's cool to hear his, like, you know, he's so taken, or the audience is so taken with him, I guess
They
you could
loved
say.
him.
But it's to hear the review. He's just quite a comical chap.
He's quite a comical chap. You know?
Indubitably.
Yes.
Indubitably.
But this is in America. This is an American review. This is in America, okay? Now, somewhere in Barnum's mind, he must have worried that people would question if the boy would grow. So again, instead of saying he was 4, he said he was 11. But by the next time Charles went on stage, suddenly Charles was now 12. And strangely enough, even though Charles met many people, even the mayor of New York, no one ever questioned his age. And when the month-long trial ended, now all this has happened within the month-long
this
trial.
is still the trial.
Right.
This is still the 4-week trial period. Yes.
I mean, and he
shit.
seems, I mean, to be 4 years old and command that type of respect and command that type of audience and be
And to
able to
learn
do
that
that
quickly.
is extremely impressive.
So now this is the end of December. Remember, they signed the contract in the middle of November, and he went back at the end of November, and he went on stage in December, and now the trial period's up. This is all within the first 30 days.
I'm sitting here thinking that this has been like months at this point. Sorry, I completely forgot we're in the trial month.
He's 4 years old.
Wow.
And Barnum had an eye for talent. He really did.
And he rehearsed the hell out of all of his acts, and he
Mm-hmm.
rehearsed the hell out of Charles.
Mm-hmm.
So when the month-long trial ended, Charles was signed to be a permanent fixture. Barnum had big plans for Stratton, and he was carefully tailoring the perfect image for his star. He dressed him in custom-made suits and jackets and tailcoats, and all the fabrics were exquisite. The wardrobe was completed by custom shoes and boots, and of course a hat. Barnum could afford the best, and he cleverly used clothing to boost Charles's age and his social standing. He became not just a man, but a gentleman. And Barnum upped his pay to $50 a week.
Oh, shit.
$1,915.70 per week, or $7,662 per month.
Oh,
a lot
shit.
of money.
Hey, that's still pretty damn good.
That's a
right
lot
now.
of money.
Holy shit.
It is.
Over $7,000 a month. I'd take that now. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
And we're back in 1842?
1842.
Whew. Wow.
Yes. So, Barnum knew what he had. He didn't want anybody stealing from him, so he paid him well. So even though Charles and his mother continued to live in the apartment above the museum, General Tom Thumb was a star.
Yeah.
And Charles quickly became the biggest draw in the museum, most likely because he wasn't a fake. People came in expecting another one of Barnum's hoaxes, but found a real miniature child who danced and sang and told jokes. And Charles honed his skills and continued to sell out the money-making theater. And ever hungry for ticket sales, Barnum watched the attendance numbers closely. And when Stratton's popularity began to wane in New York, he sent him on a tour. And the new trains meant that his fame could spread in ways that would not have been possible a few years earlier. In 1843, now Charles is 5 years old, he went on tour. He spent several weeks at the Boston Museum and then traveled by train to various places around New England. He had new routines added to his act, one of which was dressing up in drag as a little girl called Our Marianne. And the audiences couldn't get enough of him. There were paintings of him done, and people composed poems about him. Mid 19th century America was the perfect time to be Charles Stratton. Previously, publicity images had to be hand drawn by an artist. But since photography had arrived in 1839, everyone could now have their own piece of General Tom Thumb in the form of a photograph. And ever ready to exploit an angle to boost his star, Barnum rushed Charles into the studio. The child had to remain perfectly still for 3 minutes to capture each picture.
Damn.
That's a long time for a 5-year-old to sit
Yes,
still.
it is.
Yeah.
But the pictures worked. It was part calling card and part publicity shot. And people lined up to buy the pictures. And this brought General Tom Thumb into their homes and made him a household name. People collected these photos and they showed them to their friends. And then the fascinated friends would come to the show and pay the entrance fee to see Charles in person. The best new marketing tools available, Barnum had capitalized on. The pictures made Charles visible, and the railroad made him accessible. And even though Barnum was making a fortune on Charles in the United States, he thought on a much bigger scale. Barnum wanted world domination. And ever the risk taker, he decided to take Charles to England. And it was a risk. The two nations had been at war just 30 years prior, and the British had kind of left the White House a burnout shell.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No shit.
Yeah, back in 1812.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, many Victorian Brits regarded Americans as a bunch of uncouth, rabble-rousing hicks. And the little boy had just turned 6 when he returned from his tour of New England and Boston. But he would have to rest on the boat.
Don't talk about my family like that, Shelley.
I say they was still sore from losing. It's okay.
Don't talk about my family like I'm not here.
Your family.
So on January 19th of 1844, Charles Stratton, Cynthia and Sherwood Stratton, and P.T. Barnum boarded the SS Shropshire steamship and set sail across the ocean headed to England. Now, at some point on the journey, Barnum and Charles's father had a bit of a disagreement. Sherwood didn't like the way Charles was being promoted, or that Barnum had seemingly taken on the role of father to the little boy. And it was basically an argument over who the child loved more.
Oh, God.
Barnum assured the man that his goal was to make sure that Charles was an international sensation and earn enough money to be set for life. And then he reminded Sherwood that his contract was with Charles. And after 3 weeks at sea, the boat arrived in England and the entourage set out for London. With a population of nearly 2 million, it was almost 4 times bigger than New York. And Barnum was starting from scratch. So he booked Charles to appear in the Princess Theater on February 20th of 1844. He would entertain the audience between Act 2 and 3 of Donizetti's opera Pasquale. But it didn't go well. Barnum stood, in the middle of
I don't think you would mix your opera with the sideshow. I don't know.
No.
And that was exactly.
Now, I would have enjoyed that, but someone, like you're going, your opera going public in England at the time were probably just like, what the hell is this?
Well, because I was gonna say you've got 2 classes back then that are there. You got your higher class that goes to the opera. They want to see the opera. Back then,
That's right.
Shoot, I would have loved it. I'd have been like, oh hell yeah, intermission. This is great.
Right, this is neat. What is this? What's going on? Yeah.
Well, Barnum stood in the wings and watched his biggest star fail. And Barnum feared that he had lost his magic touch.
Just through the opera glasses. Charles, what is this drivel on stage?
And the London News Review was brutal. It said, and I'm quoting,
Ugh.
Thumb is a little monster who provided melancholy proof of the low state that legitimate drama has been reduced. Ouch.
Poor guy.
Damn.
He's just trying to make a living.
He's 6 years old, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody thought he was 12. So.
But still, that doesn't make it better.
No.
Yeah.
But failure for Barnum was never an option. And he realized that this was not the right kind of venue. And he set to work on another plan. Barnum realized that he had forgotten a very important detail about England, the British class system.
Mm-hmm.
So Barnum changed his tactics and focused on charming the upper class. If Charles was going to succeed, he had to get an aristocratic endorsement. So Barnum quickly rented a socially impressive townhouse at 13 Grafton Street and sent invitations to anyone and everyone in the upper echelons of society. And it worked. The Baroness Charlotte de Rothschild took the bait, and the rest of London followed. The Dukes of Devonshire, Bedford, and Buckingham all accepted invitations. Sir Robert and Lady Peel were intrigued as well and popped in. And even Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, who had defeated Napoleon Bonaparte at Waterloo in 1815, came by to meet General Tom Thumb. And when Charles did his impersonation of Napoleon for the crowd, the Duke of Wellington was hooked. He laughed and cheered and congratulated him on the spot-on impression.
Oh, man.
But most importantly,
amazing.
The Duke of Wellington told everyone about this fantastic little man. And word spread among the English aristocracy. March 9th, 1844, a soldier arrived at 13 Grafton Street to deliver an envelope. It was inviting Barnum and General Tom Thumb to an audience with Her Majesty the Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace. Jackpot.
Could you freaking imagine? You're sitting there, you're trying to like get this approval from the higher ups in the in society, and then bam,
Jackpot.
You got an invitation from the freaking queen.
Now, Barnum had always been a gambler, but he had never played for stakes this high. This singular performance could make them rich beyond their wildest dreams or be the end of Charles and Barnum's careers. Barnum went all in. He commissioned a tailor to make new suits of the most luxurious materials, and both studied royal etiquette and rehearsed incessantly. On March 23rd of 1844, Barnum and the 6-year-old Charles arrived at Buckingham Palace to meet the most powerful woman in the world. The pair waited to be announced as the doors of the royal stateroom were opened. Queen Victoria sat at the end of the room, dressed in black. The court was still in mourning from the death of Prince Albert's father. And near her were Prince Albert, some ladies in waiting, and several courtiers. Barnum and Charles, handsomely dressed in their new black velvet court attire, made their entrance. Charles confidently marched towards the Queen, and in his tiny voice, Charles tipped his hat, greeted the room, and said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," and gave a very low and respectful bow. Now, this wasn't exactly protocol.
Nope.
And a small smile played around the corners of the Queen's lips, and some of the guests could be heard stifling chuckles. And taking this as his cue, Charles launched into his routine. He sang and he danced and he gave his impression of Napoleon Bonaparte. And when the main performance had ended, the Queen took Charles by the hand and led him around the gallery. She asked him many questions, and his quick-witted answers kept the royal court in stitches. And really, Barnum was quite surprised that no one had kicked them out. And after Charles had performed his finale, the pair were ready to take their leave. And aware of the royal protocol that they could not turn their back on the Queen, Barnum and Charles backed out of the room. But Charles's small legs couldn't keep up with Barnum. So the little boy turned and ran to catch up, stopping every few steps to turn and bow to the Queen.
Oh, no.
And the running
Poor
child
guy.
excited one of the royal spaniels. And the dog that was as
Oh,
big as
no.
the boy went racing towards Charles, barking furiously. And in a moment of brilliant improvisation, Charles turned and, wielding his stick like a sword, pretended to fence with Fido.
Oh, that's awesome. Hell yeah. Have at thee, knave.
And as he battled his way out of the room, everyone, including Queen Victoria, burst into laughter. And as Charles approached the exit, he gave one final bow and disappeared beyond the door. The evening had been a triumph. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
I mean, what
awesome.
a way to recover it, though. You know what I mean? Like you're fumbling, stumbling, and all this stuff. You excite a dog, and then you're like, "On guard, I got you."
Exactly. That's what he did. He began to fence with the dog. He
awesome.
actually was probably trying to keep this big dog off of him. But
okay, and we're in 1844, so he's only 6 at this point, right?
6.
Well, he's a natural, man.
Yeah,
6.
he's a natural. Wow.
Now, I will tell you that Queen Victoria took a liking to Charles, but she also seemed a bit disturbed by his exploitation. According to Richard W. Sach, the author of Queen Victoria and the Theater of Her Age, stated that she wrote in her diary, I'm quoting, "After dinner, we saw the greatest curiosity I, or indeed anybody, had ever saw. A little dwarf, only 12 inches high and 15 pounds in weight. No description can give an idea of this little creature. He was made to imitate Napoleon and do all sorts of tricks. One cannot help feeling very sorry for the poor little thing and wishing he could be properly cared for. The people who show him off tease him a good deal, I should think." But over the next several months, Charles was invited back to the palace several times to perform and recite sketches. He met King Leopold of Belgium and Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, and he was introduced to the royal children.
Damn, I didn't know that. I didn't realize he got to meet all of these royal figures. Wow.
Yes. And Barnum had worked his magic yet again. And after the successful meeting with the Queen, General Tom Thumb was the talk of the town. He played to sold-out crowds and began to act in short plays where he would have to memorize hundreds of lines. And Barnum hired tutors who taught him several languages and math and history and how to play various musical instruments. And go ahead, Ryan.
He just goes out on stage. Now y'all opera sons of bitches want to watch me. Okay.
Listen here, you stuck-up bitches.
Oh, because the Queen says it's cool. It's cool now. Y'all didn't want nothing to do with me when I first came here. I see how it is.
Pretty much, yeah. Damn.
And always ready to strike when the proverbial iron was hot. Barnum booked Charles on a European tour. And Charles played Belgium and Spain. And near the border of Spain, he took a side trip to Pamplona to meet Queen Isabella and watch a bullfight. He traveled through France while Barnum rode ahead to set up engagements and advertise. And during these travels, Charles and Barnum grew very close. And again, this caused conflict with Stratton's parents. And they were fighting again over the allegiance and love of the little star. They were very jealous of how attached Charles was to Barnum. And as a show of good faith, Barnum cut the parents in on the profits. And by 1845, Sherwood and Cynthia were sharing half of the profits. Barnum, however, always protected Charles' money and kept it out of the hands of his parents. But the relationship between the entourage remained tense, mainly because Sherwood Stratton had begun drinking too much.
Therein lies the problem.
Mm-hmm. Daddy and Mama's getting greedy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do we know if, like, by all accounts, did P.T. Barnum treat him exceptionally well?
Exceptionally well.
I want to say that he was like one of the ones, and just from what I've read, that he was one of the ones, along with like the bearded lady and a couple of other ones, that he, I mean, he held them in like very high regard.
Very high regard.
Right.
Yeah. They were essentially his children.
Yeah.
He cared for them as he cared for his own children.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while they were doing this tour, when they were in France, 2 French dramatists had written a play specifically for Charles. Oh, and Charles was delighted, and he learned the play in French and began performing it.
Damn.
And now he was doing an entire act, plus performing 2 plays in French every single day. At this point, he is 8 years old.
Damn.
He was born for this.
Holy shit.
He's 8 years old at this time.
I mean, God Lord, I did theater for like 5 years. Like, I don't think I could ever do a whole play in French.
It's
Screw that.
hard enough to
Nope.
learn a whole play in English.
I had
Let alone
yeah,
French.
exactly. I had to play blind one time. I don't know if I can do it. That was hard enough.
Now, after his shows, he would stay around to meet the public and sell souvenirs. And the public thought that he was an adult, not only because of the advertising, but because he wore adult clothes and spoke like an adult. And he drank wine since the age of 5 and smoked cigarettes since the age of 7. And these habits were encouraged by Barnum to make him appear older.
Mm.
And it always seemed to be the women that were the first in line. And the women adored Charles. Some had a very motherly instinct because of his size, but some had other ideas. You see, the women who purchased a photograph or Barnum's book would get a kiss from Charles as a receipt. And women would line up around the block to make a purchase and get their receipt. And most would just give Charles a kiss on the cheek. But some got downright deviant to the point where it became a problem. And it was reported that it became an issue when the men were upset that their wives and daughters were spending all the money on getting kisses from Tom Thumb.
That's a little unsettling part of that story.
Yeah.
That's
now,
little,
by 1846, Barnum had decided it was time to go home to America, but not without a farewell tour. Of course not. He rented a gallery at London's prestigious Egyptian Hall and began to advertise. And this is where Tom Thumb and Victorian culture would collide. A very different attraction had also been booked into the famous venue at the same time. The painter Benjamin Robert Haydon, who believed that he alone could reform the taste of British society, had booked the gallery just down from Charles. And Haydon thought very highly of himself, not just because of his talent, but also because he was friends with Wordsworth and had been a friend of Keats when he was still alive. He thought himself, yes.
That's what I said. I was like, ooh.
Exactly.
Good for you.
And whenever you see his picture, that's what you think too. It's like, it's a whole, yeah. And he thought himself to be a defender of civilization and morality. He had his grandest exhibit planned.
Well, he sounds like he's fun at parties.
He had his gallery was to be an ambitious series of moralistic paintings depicting good and bad government. And trust me, Haydon was struck by the irony of Tom Thumb's show, a dumbed down mass entertainment offering, being booked just down the hall from his exhibition of paintings with classical and refined subject matter.
Oh, shut up.
You know, he was standing outside of his little hall going, how gauche.
Exactly. Now, here's the funny thing. Both shows opened at the same time. And 177,000 people came to see Tom Thumb, each paying a shilling, which would be about $2.35 in US dollars.
Holy
177,000 came to see Tom Thumb. And 133.5 came to see Haydon's great works. The half was a little girl.
Wait, hold on. That's not 133,500. That's just 133. Damn.
P.T. Barnum sent out in front of their door going, ha, nerd.
Now, even worse, the line to see Tom Thumb snaked right past Haydon's room. Now, this artist felt completely defeated. And 2 months after what he considered a devastating humiliation, Haydon bought it.
Just swirling his brandy.
Haydon bought a pistol.
Oh,
and
man.
standing in front of an unfinished canvas, he pulled the trigger. But he failed to kill himself. But determined to end his life, he finished the job with a razor.
Damn it, Shelley. Now I feel like an asshole.
Oh.
I built you up one way to take you another.
So, hold on. You said he stood in front of an unfinished canvas?
Mm-hmm.
Ever the artist.
Exactly. Now, the press was appalled, and the Times sneered, and I'm going to quote the Times here, triggering language. The display of a disgusting dwarf attracted hordes of gaping idiots who poured into the yawning pockets of a Yankee showman a stream of wealth, one tithing of which would have redeemed the honorable English artist from wretchedness and death.
Damn.
Hayden's friend Elizabeth Barrett Browning succinctly stated it as, "The dwarf slew the giant." And even though Tom Thumb was taking a beating in the press, his farewell shows continued to sell out. And by the end of the run, even the notoriously British, notoriously vicious British press had been won over. He knew that he had been finally accepted when the paper published a review stated, "Scarcely any exhibition within our memory has excited such interest amongst all circles as General Charles S. Stratton." They published his real name as a sign of respect for the man. So he actually won he won them back over, but boy, he took a beating after Hayden committed suicide.
Right.
They were vicious to him. And that, the excerpt I read you from that press, that was the kindest one I could find.
Ugh.
They called him all kinds of horrible things. And that's, if you want to read them, you can go find them. They were awful to him.
Oh, the press was awful back then
Yeah.
anyways.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
damn, they would just slaughter you in the freaking
Right.
Oh, for sure.
press.
Especially the British press.
Oh,
Right.
they
They've
didn't give a
always
shit.
been.
Yeah.
Didn't give a shit.
Mhm.
Now, the European tour lasted 3 years, and Charles and his entourage returned home to New York in February of 1847, and Charles was being hailed as a star. Barnum made him an equal partner in their enterprise, and his newly rich parents, Cynthia and Sherwood, built a large villa that contained an apartment for Charles, complete with appropriate-sized furniture. Charles also put his sisters through private education. He was 9 years old, but being billed as 15. The world's first international superstar. He could have retired at 9, but he continued to tour.
Damn.
And on April 13th of 1847, the young man met President James K. Polk. And then he toured the eastern United States, Cuba, and Canada. Charles now had a collection of carriages pulled by Shetland ponies that he would ride to the streets ahead of his tours to create publicity for the performances. And then he went right back to work at the American Museum because the orangutan and the fortune teller weren't exactly selling tickets. So he played 4 straight sellout weeks at 5 shows a day. And by the mid, this little kid was a workhorse.
Damn.
You hustling, man.
5 shows a day for 4 straight weeks, you said, sold out.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
Yep. And by the mid-1850s, Charles was in his late teens and he'd been touring for over a decade. And he wanted to be a serious actor. So he started appearing in Broadway plays. And Barnum had kind of stepped back to let Charles take control of his career. And the young man had a remarkable business mind, just like Barnum had taught him. But sadly, in 1855, Charles was told that his father, Sherwood, had died. Excessive drinking had led him to an early death in the Hartford Lunatic Asylum. Now, in America, the country was bitterly divided over slavery and on the brink of civil war. Barnum actually joined the campaign for the abolition of slavery and staged anti-slavery plays in his museum. And then he also brought in the Swedish opera singer Jenny Lind and pocketed a hefty $500,000 for her performances. And now this is where Barnum gets into a little bit of trouble. He had made so much money that he was overspending on everything. And he was investing also in anything that came his way. He had built a large mansion for his family and he was paying out huge checks to his act. And suddenly Barnum found himself $500,000 in debt.
Whoops.
Whew.
Well, he had to declare bankruptcy and he shuttered his Bridgeport home and moved into a small apartment in New York. And it was at this point that The Greatest Showman might have become the greatest failure had it not been for a letter. It was from his protege, Charles Stratton. He had heard of Barnum's financial trouble and wanted to help him. Charles was no longer a child, and the relationship between the general and the showman had shifted. It was no longer a paternal relationship. They were friends, confidants, and sometimes co-conspirators. So Charles went back on tour in 1856, but this time he called the shots. They returned to Europe for another successful tour of England, France, and Germany. And by 1859, Barnum had enough money to pay his creditors, recover his museum in New York, and his mansion in Bridgeport.
Damn.
The sold-out tour had put Barnum back on his feet. Now, Charles was also wealthy. He owned a mansion and a yacht and loved his little herd of Shetland ponies. But you see, there was something missing in Charles's life. He wanted love. And Barnum was only too happy to make an introduction. Now, you see, while Charles had been touring, Barnum had been putting every little person he could find under contract. And one of these was the beautiful lady Lavinia Warren Bump. She was another little person, but her life had been much different than Charles's. She had had a normal childhood and grew up in Middleborough, Massachusetts. She was educated and had become a well-respected school teacher. And inspired by General Tom Thumb's success, she had decided to turn her life upside down and enter show business. And Lavinia had caused a minor sensation in the entertainment world with her sad songs and her perfect features. And she was known as the Little Queen of Beauty. Vivacious and funny, Barnum knew that she was the perfect girl for Charles. Mm-hmm. So now he'd given him the hookup.
Matchmaker.
He was. So Barnum made the introduction in 1862, and Charles took one look at the lovely Lavinia, and he was in love. And according to Barnum, Charles said, "Mr. Barnum, that is the most charming lady I ever saw, and I believe she was created on purpose to be my wife."
Oh.
Now, isn't that sweet? And then he says, "Now you have always been a friend of mine, and I want you to say a good word for me to her. I've got plenty of money, and I want to marry and settle down in life. I really feel as if I must marry that young lady." But you see, Charles wasn't the only. Isn't that sweet? I know.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so sweet. Damn.
But you see, Charles wasn't the only one smitten with Lavinia. Charles had a rival for the hand of the fair maiden. Enter Commodore George Washington Morrison McNutt. Handsome.
Oh, I remember him. Yeah.
Handsome with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, he intended to court the little Queen of Beauty. And in the press, he was known as the $30,000 nut. This was in reference to the signing fee he had received when Barnum snatched him up while Charles was touring in Europe. And the rivalry began.
Oh, shit.
Charles showed Lavinia around his mansion. They toured his many investment properties, and he showed her his lavish lifestyle. Commodore Nutt flattered her and did his best to accommodate her every wish.
And if you play your cards right, you too can be a nut.
Now, Barnum had at one point gifted Lavinia a diamond and emerald ring, but it didn't fit her. So, and she told him, I don't really know what to do with the ring. So Barnum suggested she just give it to George as a token of friendship. So she did. But George took this as a declaration of her love, and he told everybody. Well, this whipped Charles into a frenzy at this point, and all is fair in love and war, and Charles took that to heart. While America was fighting the Civil War, Barnum had his own war raging in his ranks. Now, Charles wanted Barnum to rally for him, and he knew just what to do. He promised Barnum that if he helped him marry Lavinia, he would have a public wedding and make P.T. Barnum even richer. Now, Barnum, with the sound of cash registers ringing in his ears, agreed. Barnum convinced Lavinia to seriously consider Charles. And then he set up dinners for the couple at his home and arranged for Charles to meet her mother. Minor setback. Lavinia's mother hated Charles's new mustache and couldn't agree to any kind of future with her daughter with a man that had a mustache. So Charles, he shaved it off. Shaved it off.
I can stop. I'm just going to say, ladies, if you think that your mother does not like your boyfriend or man because, maybe he doesn't have a job. I don't know. We'll throw that out there. Imagine having her as a mother. I don't like his mustache. It's not happening.
Anything. He's got a mustache. So Charles promptly shaved it off. Now, when George learned that Barnum was helping Charles, He was livid, and he did not take that betrayal lightly. The rivalry reached its climax when George burst into the room minutes before a show at the museum and threw Charles to the ground. The two men scuffled and threw punches, and it only lasted a few seconds before the other members of the crew pulled the men apart. Harsh words were exchanged, and Commodore Nutt collected himself and left the building in a huff. They came to fights.
Can you imagine being Lavinia in this moment where like she's being like, just I guess
vigorously courted. Yes.
Right.
by these two guys, and she's being shown all these wonderful and then they she's like, no guys, please don't fight over me, stop, like
y'all fighting over
no,
yeah,
just kidding.
Yeah,
right.
And Commodore Nutt walks in, he's like, I got your boy right here, come on, let's go. And he just fucking throws down, just jumps Charles.
Oh
and
God,
stomps out after they're pulled apart.
This poor woman. I'm sorry.
I am honestly surprised the promoter that P.T. Barnum did not try to promote some sort of boxing match or something between the two.
He couldn't risk messing up his stars.
Oh yeah, couldn't get him hurt.
No, he paid them too much.
That's true.
Yeah.
A few days later, Barnum and his wife threw a dinner party for Lavinia and invited many of the show people, including Charles and George.
Shit.
Charles arrived early in order to spend some time with Lavinia. And as Barnum and his wife peeked through the keyhole, Charles proposed to Lavinia. And moments later, George arrived just in time to celebrate the happy news.
Oh hell.
Well, now in 1863, P.T. Barnum arranged the celebrity wedding of the year. He sold tickets to the wedding that would take place at the prestigious Grace Church on Broadway. But there was a little opposition. The good and the faithful didn't think that it was an appropriate wedding to be held in their church.
Oh, Lord.
The argument was that it wasn't a proper wedding and that they were show people.
So?
But eventually, true love won out. And the wedding was held in the church on February the 10th of 1863 at 12 o'clock noon. Ticket holders lined the pavement outside the church. And the other roughly 10,000 without tickets gathered outside on the street before 9 a.m., hoping to catch a glimpse of the little couple. It took Barnum 2 hours to get to the church, and police had to cordon off an area for the carriages to pass. And Barnum, of course, had set up a booth to sell souvenir pictures of the wedding that he staged days earlier in a studio.
Did Commodore Nutt stay at home?
We're getting there. Now, when the ceremony began, Lavinia looked so stunning, and her maid of honor was her younger sister, Minnie. Charles was dashing in his tuxedo, and his best man, Commodore George Nutt.
No! Stop! Oh, man.
The two men must have resolved their differences, at least in the spotlight. And both men knew that the show and the wedding must go on.
Damn.
Fun fact, which I did not put in here. One of the gifts that was gifted to the couple from Commodore Nutt, he gifted Lavinia a diamond ring as a wedding present. Yeah, Charles didn't like that.
Dude, what a player, man.
Yeah, no,
look at that.
He's like, hey,
player.
if everything goes south,
you already got that right there, my sweet.
Mm-hmm.
You just come on home to never
exactly.
mind. I can't finish that because his last name is Nutt, but I'll let y'all fill in the blank.
That's right. So once Charles Stratton and Lavinia Warren were married, they were whisked off to the reception at the Metropolitan Hotel, which Barnum had also sold tickets to at a cost of $75 per person. This would have been a $1,870 ticket to get into the reception in today's money.
Wow.
And he sold. Okay, so here's the thing: the newlyweds they stood up on top of a grand piano to greet their 2,000 guests.
Damn!
Wow.
And this is the one that's $7,500 a ticket to get in.
It was $75 a ticket to get in, which is basically $1,870 per person in today's money.
Phew.
Almost $3 million. Okay, or a little over $3 million.
Hot damn.
Okay, that's what he made off the reception. Now, after greeting their guests This was still in the middle of the Civil War now. The massive wedding made the New York Times for 3 straight days, and it was billed as the fairy wedding. And their love story provided a much-needed escape for a conflict-weary nation. It knocked the Civil War off the front page of newspapers for 3 days.
For 3 days. Can you imagine the freaking Civil War? It's like, now go ahead and put that on page 2. That's not important. We got this couple getting married. Their front page.
Yeah. So the couple began their honeymoon with a stop at the White House, where the Strattons were received by President and Mrs. Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln joked to Charles Stratton. He said, "Charles, you have completely thrown me into the shade." The next day, the newlyweds crossed the Potomac to Arlington Heights to visit the Union soldiers that were encamped there. And they were greeted with cheers and performed a quick show to raise the boys' spirits. And after that, then they continued their real honeymoon to India and Europe. Once objects of fascination, now Charles and his wife were beloved. The Strattons were living the American dream, but there was one thing that money couldn't buy them: a baby of their own. That is, until Barnum stepped in. Now, Barnum knew that the addition of a baby would send the public into a frenzy, and they would be willing to pay a fortune to get a glimpse of the tiny couple's bundle of joy. Barnum had pushed the envelope more than a few times, but he had never taken it this far. Barnum announced that in December of 1863, Charles and Lavinia had a new arrival, and the couple went on tour to show off the new baby. And the crowds went crazy. But it was all a lie. Incredibly, the little couple went along with the ruse. And Barnum rented different babies for photo shoots and live appearances. When they went to Europe, they rented babies there by the hour. And when the scam had finally run its course, Barnum casually announced that the baby had died.
Oh.
Or at least that's the story that was told. Now, Lavinia confessed to the hoax in her autobiography, and the story went unquestioned for over a century. But with Barnum, things are never what they seem. And in 1866, when Charles and Lavinia were touring Europe, they began to cancel shows very suddenly. And this was very strange and unusual for the couple. Now, British historian John Gannon discovered a burial register for St. Gregory's Church in Norwich, England. And there is a death certificate and a burial certificate for a Minnie Warren Stratton, 2 years of age, died September 25th, 1866, buried September 26th, 1866. She is listed as the daughter of Charles Sherwood Stratton, and his occupation is listed as exhibitor. In an article that was dated September 29th of 1866, it states that the Strattons buried their child, and there were over 1,000 people that congregated at the cemetery to pay respects. So was the baby a hoax? A hoax wouldn't require a death certificate or a burial certificate or a funeral with spectators. But in his research, John Gannon actually found a headstone for Minnie Warren Stratton. Who this child was, a foundling or the Stratton's actual child, we will most likely never know.
I could see if they did, if they did want to keep that ruse up, I could see why they did it. Because, you're that famous at that particular moment in time. I'm sure that them being of smaller stature, someone's taking their baby from them was probably a very real fear for them.
He was rich. He could buy and sell damn near anybody he wanted to.
I'm sure. I'm saying, but like if somebody got stupid and tried to like take their baby, you know what I mean? So maybe
I guess that could be a possibility.
Right. I think maybe that's probably why they went with the ruse.
Yeah. Well, in 1869, Barnum suggested a tour around the world on the United States newly completed around the United States, on the newly completed Pacific Railroad. So the General Tom Thumb Troupe embarked on a 3-year global tour with Lavinia's sister Minnie and Commodore George Nutt. And see, the public had actually fallen in love with this wedding quartet. And they all knew that there was money to be made, so they all agreed. And it began. I know. Well,
do you think they were like
Nut won't go
secretly
away.
fighting? Like, you think they were like secretly fighting behind the scenes? Like,
Yeah.
he hated him and he hated him, but it looked good for everybody else.
I think so. It began with a railway journey across the continental U.S., and everywhere they went, huge crowds followed. They were the first performers to ever travel by rail to what was then the Wild West. They had encounters with outlaws who shot at the trains, and they shocked locals who weren't used to their stature. And once they reached San Francisco, they boarded a steamship and headed for Yokohama, Japan, where they entertained Emperor Meiji. They then traveled to China, Singapore, and India, where they rode on elephants to visit the King of Brunei's. And then they sailed to Australia, despite Charles's concern of convicts. Charles Stratton was the first American star to tour Australia.
Wow.
In Sydney, he met Prince Albert, who flirted with Minnie incessantly at a costume ball. And while there, the group did a free show for an orphanage in the outback. And Lavinia was amazed to find that the children already knew who Tom Thumb was. They went to Egypt and they saw the Great Pyramids. And after that, the group sailed through the Suez Canal in the spring of 1871. And they were on their way to Europe. They toured Italy and Austria before heading back to the final leg of their tour in England. They returned to New York in June of 1872. They had traveled 55,487 miles, 3,216 of which were by sea.
Damn.
And along the way, they had performed 1,471 times in 587 different locations.
Wow.
Jesus.
This little group had successfully completed the world's first global celebrity tour, and it wasn't until the 20th century that any other celebrity even tried. But Charles was tired of touring. He was 34 years old, 40 inches tall, and weighed 70 pounds. He didn't want to sing songs and dress in childish costumes anymore. He wanted to give informal lectures about his travel abroad. And he and Lavinia bought 150 acres in her hometown of Middleborough, Massachusetts. They built a beautiful mansion with everything sized for them from the staircase to the stove. It was their hideaway from the bright lights where they could just be Charlie and Vinny. Now, Charles still traveled to Bridgeport and New York, but as Charles embraced domestic life, the trips became more infrequent. He spent his time with the fellow Freemasons. He had joined them in October of 1862. And he hunted for deer with a custom rifle, and he sailed his yacht on the Long Island Sound and took part in the races from New York to Nantucket, often winning or coming in at least second. And coverage of his activities briefly moved from the entertainment section of the newspaper to the sports page. Now in 1874, Commodore George Nutt was kicked out of the troop due to his drinking, and he was replaced by Edward Newell, who eventually married Lavinia's sister Minnie. But sadly, Minnie died in childbirth in 1878.
Hmm.
Now, in 1870, while Charles was still on tour, Barnum had gotten into the circus business with James Bailey. And in 1880, Barnum convinced Charles to appear in the circus. And Charles and Lavinia were treated like royalty, but the engagement was short-lived. There were two reasons for this. The main reason was the money, because Barnum was splitting the profits with Bailey, and then he paid the Strattons out of his share. And to be honest, Charles and Lavinia could make more money traveling in their own show. And the second reason was competition. Competitors had begun to copy Barnum's odd exhibits, and the world of the freak show was getting a little too freaky. There was a woman from Mexico named Julia Pastrana who was exhibited as the Bear Woman, and she had married her manager. And after her death, her husband toured her mummified body to make a profit.
Oh, hell.
No.
So the sideshows had started to become grotesque. And that was not the world that Barnum and Charles had helped to create. And fortunately, Charles was rich enough that he could turn his back on the circus. But the lure of the stage was so strong. And Charles and Lavinia went back to touring. And in 1881, word reached the couple that George Nutt had died. He had destroyed himself with alcohol, perhaps always pining for Lavinia. Now, on January 10th of 1883, while touring Milwaukee, Wisconsin, George and Lavinia and their entourage were staying at the Newhall House Hotel. The couple was fast asleep when a frantic and loud banging woke up Charles. He groggily opened the door, and an officer raced inside, yelling for them to get up and get out. And in an instant, Charles was wide awake. Through the door, he saw a fire that surrounded the room. And in a moment of terror, they realized the only way out was through the window. And they were not on the first floor.
Uh-oh.
The officer threw open a window and frantically screamed for a ladder. The officer scooped up Lavinia and carried her down the ladder, and Charles followed, wearing only his pajamas. They had escaped, but 70 to 100 other souls weren't so lucky.
Damn.
Their manager's wife and their coachman perished in the blaze.
Oh, damn.
And the streets were littered with the bodies of guests who had jumped to escape being burned alive.
Mm.
And this experience shook Charles to his very core. The Newhall House fire was one of the largest hotel fires in American history.
Mm-hmm.
So Charles and Lavinia returned to Middleborough. Charles was 45 years old and weighed 75 pounds, and he was now 3 feet and 4 inches tall, and he was tired. The morning of July 15th, 1883 began normally. Lavinia was in New York on business, and Charles chatted with his brother-in-law, Edward, as he dressed for the day. Just after Edward left the room, he heard a thud. Edward rushed back in to find Charles lying lifeless at the foot of his bed. He had died from a stroke, alone.
Aww.
Poor little guy.
That upsets me, because I kind of love him now, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charles Sherwood Stratton was brought back to Bridgeport for burial. In the church, over 10,000 of his fans filed past his coffin made of silver walnut to pay their respects and gaze one last time on America's first international superstar. I got really upset. I love this little dude. Over 20,000 people attended the funeral, standing beyond the gates and out into the street. The one person not in attendance, P.T. Barnum. He was traveling and did not make it back in time. But Barnum did pay his respects. He purchased a life-size statue of Charles and placed the monument at his gravesite in Mountain Grove Cemetery in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Wow.
And when P.T. Barnum died just 8 years later on April the 7th of 1891, the world's greatest showman was laid to rest just a few feet from Charles Stratton. They had been friends for over 40 years, and both owed their success to the hard work of the other. So it only seemed fitting that because they were close in life, they remained close in death. Now, Lavinia Warren remarried in 1885 to Count Primo Maggi and continued to tour and appear in silent films. But she never got over Charles. She even left instructions that on her death, she was to be buried next to Charles.
Oh.
And when she passed away on November 25th of 1919, she was interred next to Charles, and her gravestone simply reads, his wife.
Oh, goddamn.
Now, I know. Now, just like the storybook character of Tom Thumb, Charles Stratton was a tiny boy with an adventurous spirit. Despite his small stature, he had many adventures and overcame daunting obstacles, and he used his cleverness and intelligence to become successful. Charles Sherwood Stratton lived a life that most could never imagine. In his life, he had been seen by over 50 million people. He had entertained presidents, czars, emperors, kings, and queens. Propelled by the legendary Barnum spin, Charles was rich and famous beyond most people's wildest dreams. It was truly a great success story. Or was it a great exploitation? At the time, no one questioned the appropriateness of the freak show. There weren't any labor laws or disability acts to protect those that were different. The greatest showman was interested in anything legal that would sell tickets. And Charles Stratton wasn't really given a choice in his career. Thrust onto stage at age 4 and stared at by millions who regarded him as a freak. But no matter the beginnings, Charles eventually took charge of his own career. And because of Barnum, Charles was able to set up and earn a living for the rest of his life, regardless of his age or his size. And at 9, while he could have retired and lived comfortably, he continued to work. Perhaps Charles was addicted to the fame or the roar of the applause. And instead of being stared at for being different, he was adored. And in the dark world of the freak show, Charles Stratton was a light. He inspired others to overcome their own humble beginnings and reach for success. Charles had a good life and he was loved. He was a natural born performer who only incidentally was considered a freak. But maybe just like the rest of us, what he was truly seeking was just to be accepted. Sorry, I love.
No, I'm like,
No,
I was. Oh my god, I didn't say anything for like the last, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. Because Shelly, you just like sucks me in. I'm like, damn.
So
I got very emotionally invested in him, as you can tell.
Does the little mansion that he had built, does it still exist?
It is still there.
Oh, you can go see
It's
it.
still there, and I don't know if they allow tours through it or not. But I did find a documentary where they said they were the first cameras that had ever been allowed in there. And he had this custom built teeny tiny stove made because Lavinia liked to cook, even though he had a chef and a housekeeper.
Mhm.
She liked to cook, so he had a teeny tiny stove crafted so that if she wanted to cook, she could.
So is it a normal size mansion with just the little tiny fixtures, or is it like a smaller size mansion?
It's a normal size, huge mansion.
Okay.
But everything
is built for them.
Built for scale, yeah.
It's built for them. Yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna say one thing before we get into talking any further about him. God damn, if I can't find a love life like them two had, Jesus shit.
Right.
I mean, hell
yeah.
God damn. When you said Charlie,
you better be
Vinny, I
careful.
was like, oh.
You better be
so
careful.
Sweet.
You might have to fight a Commodore nut off just to get what you need.
Bring it.
Bring
it.
I'm telling you, I cut out a lot of their love story because I wanted to tell you all of his life, and there's even more to it. I really cut and chopped this up, but just some of the things he did, and it was a quick from the time they met to the time. I mean, everything in Charles' life was fast.
Yeah.
In a month he was signed permanently. He was making, over $1,000 a week. And before he was 9, he had more money than he knew what to do with. And something very interesting was that, where he said something about Barnum, that he was slimy. He was a purveyor of exhibits.
Right.
But I will tell you this, that he had actually guarded Charles's money. And when he made Charles an equal partner, that's when he let Charles have access to it, because he did not want his parents to use it and to squander it.
Good for him.
Like he had seen happen with so many of his other stars.
Yeah.
So,
and like you said, Blake, I know you said you get that slimy vibe off him. I think just the nature of being a promoter comes off a little
That's
bit.
the whole thing.
You know what I mean?
Let me explain on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's a combination of a few things. It's being the promoter aspect of it. You are at this point acquiring people.
Right.
Which, I mean, there's no difference in the entertainment industry today.
They do now, right?
I know. I was going to say, I get it, but it's just because times have changed so much.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything that really could protect these people back then that there is now. It just felt like
it's that Hollywood
like an
agent
opportunity.
Vibe.
It's that slimy Hollywood agent vibe. That's
it's
like
an unsavory business.
jumping on top of an opportunity that all that they can see is dollar signs to be made, and it just feels it just feels weird to me. So I'm not saying that though. I mean, it's just weird. I'm not saying that P.T. Barnum overall was a slimy person.
Well, here's the thing.
That
P.T. Barnum,
no matter who was doing
hoaxer. He was
known
for his great hoaxes.
Right.
And so whenever he had the genuine article, of course he was going to do everything he could to make him famous. And Barnum was kind of known as a respectable con man. Like he's going to con you, he's telling you he's conning you. So that gave him some validity and respectability, which is a very odd, dichotomy of images.
Right. He is a carnival barker in the most grand sense. That's what he is. And he is he's very interesting, and I'm glad you kind of told some of his story too, because P.T. Barnum,
you can't tell one story without the other. You really can't, especially for this period, the first basically from age 4 to age 9, 10. Barnum focused all of his effort on Charles Stratton. And I did call him Charles Stratton to the entire thing, unless he was specifically being referred to as General Tom Thumb. I thought it was important to say the man's name.
Right.
And did you guys see the similarities between the Grimm story and the actual story of Charles
around
Stratton's
the world
life?
Travels and
Sold by
royalty.
his parents. Sold by his parents. And the people were willing to, they sold him to a stranger who took him away.
Right.
A lot of similarities. Entertained a queen, just like Tom Thumb the story entertained King Arthur.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the parallels are crazy. But what I was going to say is let's kind of talk about something that you mentioned. Do you think that with the freak show and with the sideshows that were going on, do you think that these people were exploited, or do you think that they were given something to do when normally they would not have had anything to do? They would have been ostracized in their communities. What do you think?
Well, I do think that it was exploitive. I think that this exploitation actually gave them the best chance to thrive, survive, and raise themselves out of whatever their standings were.
I agree with that.
Where else are the wild men of Borneo, who Barnum also had, and they were the exotic freaks in the show, where basically he paid them a lot of money to throw things at the audience and growl and scratch, but they retired as what might have been millionaires. They bought, whenever they retired from being in the for lack of a better word, the freak show with Barnum, they bought a plot of land and lived out their life quietly away from everyone else.
Right.
Very, very rich.
I'm really glad that you kind of busted open this door to P.T. Barnum, because he is such a character in and of himself. And so I'm interested for us to cover more of the prominent figures that he had in his sideshows, his freak shows.
Child, I want to do one on Commodore George Washington Morrison Mutt now. I actually got sidetracked to start looking into that little bit. Oh my gosh, he is a damn mess.
Yeah.
He is a damn mess.
He is a mess.
Yeah.
So you were talking about them retiring with lots of money. I actually have a bit of a connection to Changanang Bunker. They were buried in North Carolina. They moved to North Carolina and retired, bought some land in Mount Airy, and lived a very full life.
They had like 17 children.
They did. And they're still buried in North Carolina.
They actually were late to the party with Barnum, because they actually had their own thing going on, and they kind of joined up with Barnum later in years, and that's what actually put them over the top with their money, so they could just walk away and go, I'm doing this. So
he did help them a lot. He helped them have a life that they normally probably would not have had.
They made more money than they would have ever been able to, they would have ever been given the opportunity to,
and were able to live a better life than most, because they were able to, and
because their money, they could live it on their terms.
Exactly.
So, gentlemen, any final thoughts about Charles Sherwood Stratton?
Maybe not necessarily about him, but I'm going to praise you for just a second, because you have the comments actually blowing up for how well you told this story. I'm so
truly attached to him.
You truly blew this one out of the park.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And everybody is agreeing in the comments. So I have to praise you live on air
Oh,
for that, because
as you can tell, look how teary and I felt so much for this man.
But that's the thing that a lot of people, we've said it every now and then, on these podcasts, is that we spend so much time with these people, learning about them and researching them and putting together their story and trying to find you every little tiny detail that we possibly can, and wrapping up every person that comes into their story. It's just, you get so emotionally invested that sometimes you finish an episode like this and it's just, the emotion comes out. I've cried on this podcast. Shelly's cried on this podcast. I think Ryan's the only one that hasn't, but that's all right.
That's because he's cold-hearted.
No, I'm not.
But no, I apologize that I could not get through my conclusion because I was just getting so emotional. And my apologies.
No, it's okay. I think, hey, that's what makes you human. That is what pulls people as much as
human.
As much as we don't want people to know that about us, that we do, it's what makes you human.
She's a cat alien, don't you remember?
And I know, right? And you you have a wonderful knack for pulling people into the story, and everybody's agreeing in the comments. So I have to. That's my final word for today, because I don't think there's anything else to say on Stratton.
Any final thoughts on Charles Sherwood Stratton, Ryan?
I think he's a fascinating character and truly American. Where else could this happen but only in America?
That's right.
P.T. Barnum.
And I'm going to say I'm so emotionally invested, and he's one of these ones I'm going to be sad to say goodbye to. And I may actually go research a little bit more on him. 26 articles, 6 documentaries, and I don't even know how many newspaper clippings.
And it's someplace I've always wanted to go, and we should go to the P.T. Barnum Museum up. It is in Bridgeport, is it not?
Bridgeport, Connecticut, yes.
Mm-hmm. We should go. We should go. We should go see his grave and go see Charles's grave and go to the museum.
Absolutely. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
Absolutely. All right. I'm shooting from the hip tonight because my documents are down and I don't have my script in front of me, but here we go. Don't forget, After Dark with EVP Season 1 and Season 2 is all out on Paraflix Paranormal Plus. That is 16 episodes of haunted locations, new evidence that you will not see anywhere else other than that, as well as special guest interviews that we have. That is going to be posted to our Facebook page tomorrow via our Linktree link. So be on the lookout for that. That is also going to be posted in the Linktree link is going to be in the show notes for you audio listeners. Also in that Linktree link, you will find our public investigations. We do have tickets available. I think we have 2. We had somebody back out of Yorktown Memorial Hospital. So if you want tickets to Yorktown Memorial Hospital, September the 7th, go get those. That's Ryan's birthday celebration. Other than that, we're waiting to put more on the calendar, but we do have some more events coming later this year. That is also going to include our online merchandise store, as well as every social media platform you can find us, and our Patreon page. That is just $5 a month. For $5 a month, you get over 400 Patreon exclusive extra videos you're not going to get anywhere else. That's going to include our pre and post broadcast, which is the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast, where we share a lot of crazy stories, tell you a lot more personal things that will help us never become president, and fight Narnia and all that shit. Yeah, that was out when we started this. That was out. But anyways, again, that's $5. That is never going to change. It also includes raw and unedited paranormal investigation footage as well. So if you ever want to watch any of that, there's your chance to do that. And we also offer that 7-day free trial for those of you who want to check it out before you purchase. Make sure you follow us across all social media channels, like we were saying. And for you audio listeners out there, we are live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube if you want to see the video versions and all our lovely faces and watch Shelly cry like she just did. Those are all the ways you can help support everything Vaguely Paranormal. But we also appreciate your comments, likes, shares, downloads, and all of that stuff. And any stories you want to share with us, those can be shared to us at theevppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Like, share, and go subscribe to that YouTube page. Well, we want to thank you guys for joining us tonight on Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Thank you for being here. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.